Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wasallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning, Instagram fam, friends and followers of as-Saafiy. And welcome to another episode of Revert Reflections. And we have, over the past few days, been reflecting on relationships in Islam generally, and specifically the relationship between husband and wife. And today what I wanted to do is offer a few advices on relationship maintenance. And that is because, brothers and sisters, the reality of the marital relationship is that it is seldom one which is free of problems. That two people who live that close together and are that often in close proximity to one another at some point in time are going to get on each other's nerves. They're going to do something which their spouse, their counterpart, does not like. And there's going to be an argument, there's going to be a disagreement of sorts, etc. And sometimes these arguments and different disagreements and these differences of opinion and these differences may appear irreconcilable, and they put a strain on the relationship and put the relationship at risk of being broken, coming undone, etc. And so we're in need of this advice on how to maintain the relationship, this relationship maintenance. And so I'm going to offer a few advices this morning. I not claim that what I'm going to say is an exhaustive list, but I do think these are some common tools that if we master their use, we will find that our relationships are far better off than they were when these tools, or if these tools, are not employed. So the first one is to communicate. And that may seem like a no-brainer. Two people living together are going to need to talk to each other, going to need to communicate, going to need to connect, going to need to be able to exchange meanings, transfer meanings between themselves. But in many cases, people get into marriage and somehow, some way, they forget how to, or they fail to communicate. And oftentimes, brothers and sisters, what we do when we're communicating with our spouses is we communicate with our actions. We communicate with our actions instead of our words. And sometimes we're communicating with our words, but the person just isn't hearing us, or the message isn't coming across with our words, and so we tend to default to communicating with our actions. So, for example, one way that spouses communicate when they're upset with their spouse, when they feel hurt by their spouse, is that they withdraw and they give them the silent treatment. And this is not an effective way of communicating because the counterpart, your spouse, doesn't know how to interpret that. What does that mean? What have I done? The only way they're going to know is if you actually verbalize it. But in many cases we don't. We withdraw, we give the silent treatment, and we speak in codes. We say things, we speak in metaphors, and we speak figuratively. And the person has to somehow figure out, and if they're unable to do so, if they have to figure out what we mean, figure out where we're coming from, and if they're unable to do so, then the problem persists. The cause for the pain, the cause for the spouse being upset will persist. Another way that we communicate through our actions, and we communicate effectively through our actions, is by being curt, rude, and snippy. So basically what we'll do is when we're upset and our spouse is trying to communicate with us, we'll give them one-word answers. We'll give them very impersonal answers. We will say things like, because, I don't know, we'll see, you figure it out. We'll say things like that. It's obvious that we're upset about something, but what we're upset about is not coming across through this rude, curt, and snippy approach. Another example, and this is common amongst men, although it's not exclusive to men, is by being abusive. And we can be abusive sometimes through our demeanor. So looking angry, looking menacing, yelling, and also threatening to hit, or actually hitting. And in many cases, when this happens with men, there's a message there that has been overlooked or ignored by the wife, and the man is trying to communicate it in an alternate way. So, for example, when a man starts becoming threatening and angry and menacing looking and threatening to hit or actually hitting, in many cases he's saying, I feel emasculated. I feel that you don't recognize me as a man. You don't recognize me as the head of the household. And I'm going to have to assert my authority. And unfortunately, they assert it in a very harmful and a very dangerous and a very unacceptable way. The point is, brothers and sisters, is that we have to learn how to communicate with our words and tell our spouses how we are feeling. And when our spouses communicate, which brings me to the third point, to the second point, or the second advice. When our spouses communicate with us, we have to listen. This is a big problem too. Our spouses in many cases are communicating with their words and telling us that you are hurting me by doing this. When you do this, this upsets me. When you do this, it makes me feel devalued. It makes me feel demeaned. It makes me feel denigrated. They're telling us how something we're doing or saying makes them feel. And for whatever reason, we hear the words, but we don't understand what they're saying in accordance with what they have said. And so we continue to do the behavior, and that forces the person to go back to the issue that was the impetus for the first advice. It forces them to communicate in other ways. They're saying, I'm saying with my words how I feel, or how certain behaviors make me feel, and you're not responding, and so I'm going to have to communicate. You're not getting the message, so I have to communicate the message in a different way. And so it becomes this, this never-ending cycle of failure to listen, failure to hear what the person is saying, and then that person being forced to communicate in a way which is nonverbal through their behavior, and us not getting the message, and then what? It's this continuous loop. And so one way to break that cycle is to listen better. Listen to what our spouses are saying verbally when they tell us, hey, when you do this, it hurts me. And it's so frustrating to be in a relationship with someone. And you tell them, for example, I don't like it when you go out of the house. I don't know where you are. And you don't tell me anything. You just get up and you leave, and I don't know where you're going, who you're going to be with, how long you're going to be gone, etc. And the person continues to do that. And so then the person, the husband in this case, for example, would act out and assert his authority in a way which is maybe violent and threatening and unfortunate and inappropriate. And it just creates more problems. Whereas if the spouse, in this case the wife, responded accordingly, meaning she heard what the husband, she actually listened to what he said, and either they had a dialogue about it, or she just complied, then the whole cycle would just end right there. And so listening is so critically important in our relationships, and it's critically important to relationship maintenance. Hear what your spouse is saying. Another thing too is sometimes our spouse says something, and then we say, I'm hearing, and it's something totally different from what they said. We have to learn how to listen to what the person is saying, and believe them when they say what they say. That if they tell you that X hurts me, it's not Y. It's not something else. It's X. We accept it on its face. And if it's not actually X, the failure is not ours. The failure is what our spouses, who has to communicate more effectively. A third advice, brothers and sisters, is avoiding the shame game. Which the shame game basically is when we make our spouses feel inadequate. And there are certain types of shaming apparatuses or means of shaming which are particularly hurtful to the genders. So for example, with men, the particular button that women like to push that they shouldn't push, the particular type of shaming that women like to do, is telling a man that he's not man enough. This is a knife which cuts particularly deep with men. So basically a woman will say, sometimes they'll say it in no uncertain terms, and sometimes they'll say it in a roundabout way. They'll tell a man, you're not man enough. You're not a good enough leader. You're not a good enough provider. You're not a good enough protector. You're weak. If we were outside and push came to shove and somebody wanted to hurt me and the kids, you wouldn't step between us. You wouldn't do that. You're not tough enough. I remember that time so-and-so said this and you didn't say something back, and you're not man enough. You're not a protector. That hurts men and cuts them particularly deep. And it creates wounds that may appear to heal but have not really healed. And there are many men who are in relationships which are not working, and the reason why they're not working is because their women have made them feel emasculated, have made them feel less than a man. And many of them are busting their tails to be the men that their women need, the men that their women want, the men that their women deserve. And they're trying to be good providers. Some people, I know them, they're working 2 jobs. They'll work a full-time job, which is extremely stressful, and they'll take on extra jobs and extra work responsibilities so they can provide for their families adequately, more than adequately. They try to be the type of husband that the Prophet ﷺ was, in the sense that the Prophet ﷺ was extremely patient. He was extremely tolerant. He was, is extremely understanding, and they try to be that. They try to be that, and they try to be the protectors. They try to be tough enough and man enough, and they're going through things, and they'll keep all of that inside because they don't want to show weakness to their wives and be called weak by their wives. On the other side of the coin, the shame game when it comes to women. What is the knife that cuts them particularly deep? Their appearance. They're not pretty enough. Saying they're not pretty enough. They're not skinny enough. They're not intelligent enough. Questioning their intelligence. They're not good enough in terms of their cooking skills. They're not good enough in things that are particular to women, or women particularly strive with their husbands to be good at. And the Prophet ﷺ, he talked about this, avoiding the shame game, avoiding putting down your spouse, avoiding doing the dozens with your spouse, especially when you're fighting. Sometimes we're joking with each other and we understand it's a joke, and we leave that gathering and no one's hurt because we know it was all in fun. We have to be good sports about it because it was just a joke. But there are instances when we're fighting and emotions are running high and we're in a heightened state of emotion. In those situations, we just can't hit below the belt, but we do. And so a man will tell his wife, you pig, you're fat, you're overweight, you look awful. You need to work out like so-and-so's wife. You need to learn how to cook like such and such wife. And this, in many cases, as I said before, it wounds a woman in a way that she may never heal from it. She'll become embittered. There'll be so much resentment. And a man will be wondering why a wedge now has been driven between him and his wife. Why we just don't connect the way we did when we were younger, before the kids came. And it's not because the kids came. It's because he's saying these things which make her feel inadequate, which are affecting and eroding her self-esteem. And the Prophet ﷺ understood this, and he spoke about this. He said in the hadith, he said, "La yafruk mu'minun mu'mina." I'm sorry. No, that's one of the hadith. But the one I really wanted to mention was he said, when he talked about the rights of the wives and how a husband should treat his wife, he said, وَلَا تُقَبِّحْ. He said, and don't say to your spouses you are ugly. Don't talk about their appearance. And he was telling men this because why? Women are particularly sensitive when it comes to what? Their appearance and being what? Woman enough. Just like we as men are particularly sensitive to having our manhood brought into question or questioned. And so this is another very important advice for relationship maintenance. Avoid, brothers and sisters, the shame game. And if you look at your marriage and you see it seems like it's starting to erode, starting to fall apart, take a step back and look at this. Do I engage? Do my spouse and I engage in the shame game? If we do that, that's why. And we got to fix that. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy to fix that, but we have to fix that. And then last but not least, and I think I'm getting a signal that I need to get off. Last but not least, brothers and sisters, as far as advice is don't make it all about you. We hear a lot in marriage, I want. My husband needs to do this. My wife needs to do this. I want. You hear this a lot for people who are married and people who are thinking of getting married, trying to get married. All you hear is about what they want and what their spouse has to bring to the table or needs to bring to the table or how their spouse needs to step up their game. But are we looking in the mirror and looking at ourselves? What are we bringing to the table? What are we bringing to the table? Don't be the spouse who all you bring to the table is the bedroom. Your Islam is awful. Your manners are awful. Your understanding of marriage is awful. Your kindness, your politeness, your contributions in a meaningful way to a relationship are lacking. And all you have is a list of what? Of your demands. And nothing, when somebody says, okay, well, what do you bring to the table? That list has nothing on it or has very few things on it. We can't make marriage about us because why? When people get married, they don't get married just to meet the needs of others. They also get married to what? To get their needs met. And so we have to start taking a step back in our relationships and look at ourselves. What am I bringing to the table? And if we're not bringing much to the table, we need to work on that. We need to work on ourselves and improve what we bring to the table so that our spouse's needs are not being neglected. Many people are in marriages and they're giving and they're not taking anything. They're starving. And that's why the marriages are starting to what? To come undone. Because a person just gets to a point where they hit a brick wall and they can't go on like that. I can't go on not getting the things that I need. out of a marriage, giving everything I can to the marriage and getting nothing in return. And so, brothers and sisters, these are 4 advices on relationship maintenance. Not sure if we'll continue that list tomorrow or if we'll go in a different direction, but I hope that these 4 advices will be found to be beneficial and that we'll apply them in our marriages to make our marriages better. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك بن محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.